thank you for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate you're here. And as I said to our participants, or our valued consultants, I would feel very odd to just begin as usual, meaning that I would start with reviewing the case that we heard last time, and then hear the case that will be presented to us later on by Ludmila Hebring. Because I think what just happened last week in the Ukraine and what happened between Putin and Trump must feel absolutely awful, I think, in the Ukraine. So I wanted to give some room that we can discuss it, since it's a rather also international audience that we have here, with people from the United States, from France, from Greece, and obviously from the Ukraine. So I wanted to give you a chance to really speak about what it is like for you to have Trump, I don't even want to call him president, begin with this blatant lie and of saying that your president had started the war and that he was going to take care of it by joining forces with Putin. I just wanted to see what the mood is and what the reaction is among you, and what I think you will be also interested, maybe how other nations see this. So I don't know, Oleksandr, do you want to go first, perhaps? Uh-huh. Well, I can start with my opinion, which is that I was absolutely disgusted, dismayed, shocked to hear how quickly Trump apparently jumped sides and agrees now with Putin. That Zelensky is a dictator, that that he was the one to start the war. I mean, many things can be said, but I don't think any, to blatantly tell an untruth, and to position himself beforehand as the big negotiator and peace dealer, when it largely looks to me as if he's sort of really selling out the Ukraine to the Russians. So I have to say, I'm horrified. I've been depressed since then, and I feel terrible about it. At the same time, I feel also I've been talking also with Françoise yesterday, and she encouraged me not to be too dismayed, but to really, also remain faithful and encouraging of the things that we did as a group, and we will continue as a group, and continue our work no matter what. And I think it's in these little and yet very big things that we've been now doing for 3 years And seeing so many of you tonight as well is really an incredible sign of courage and trust that I feel we have in one another.
Yes,
Jeanne, can I jump in? Go ahead, Françoise.
Yes, we phoned to each other yesterday evening late. And I said to Jeanne that indignation, of course, we are full of indignation. This is rotten, this is awful, and so on. But they like that, those dictators. They like us to be to be, you know. So the important thing is what we do. And this group is a part of resistance against those lies. And in the press, on my phone, I was looking at the news, and there was a photo of Zelensky saying he is alone. He's not alone. What we are doing, you are not alone, and that's what. Thanks to the Freud Museum, they took a very political stance by starting this group, which is very, very fruitful, which is it's a research in progress, and with an exchange at each time. It's a co-research, and this is very strong. And I was born in 43, I always say that. But the resistance in France started with very tiny groups. And they were very efficient after a while. And so I just say, you are not alone. We are there while today, all our regular sessions give me courage. Mm-hmm. And I hope it gives you courage too. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes, thank you, Françoise. Let me say a few things. I mean, first, Jeanne, like you, of all the cruel and stupid things Trump has done in the last 3 or 4 weeks, this one hit me the hardest. It made me depressed as well. And I feel utterly ashamed of the US president. Yes, as Françoise said, more and more part of the resistance. It's an utter betrayal, and we know the role of betrayal in trauma, mainly from Françoise and Jean-Max's work. So it's an absolutely awful, horrific moment. The question in the States is who and what emerges to contain this man. And Congress has a lot of power in this situation, though it has refused to use it so far. But it was interesting this morning that many Republican senators essentially criticized Trump's statement yesterday. They broke with his statement. They said Russia started this war. We all know that, and so on. But they covered themselves from Trump's wrath by saying, but we're giving him a little bit of negotiating room to make these rhetorical statements that he doesn't really mean. I'm not sure what Trump means myself, but it was a little bit reassuring to hear Republican senators publicly break with him, because they actually do have the power to stop him. And so then also there was an interview yesterday with the editor of the New Yorker magazine, who was interviewing the leader of the American Civil Liberties Union. The other main guardrail here in the US is the judicial system. And over the last 3 weeks, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed many lawsuits against Trump's actions. And the editor said, well, what if Trump simply refuses to accept a judicial verdict? If the Supreme Court says you can't do this, and he does, what happens then? And this man said, then we shut the country down. And I don't know what he means exactly by that, but one of the things he elaborated a bit is that a lot of wealthy businessmen back Trump. And if Trump starts costing them a lot of money, they will not back Trump. And so that could come to a head sooner than later. Already in the States, the last day of this month, there's going to be a boycott of any purchases by anybody anywhere in the States as a kind of a warning shot that something has to happen here or we're going to try to shut this thing down. So we'll see. And as I step back, I mean, there's so many problems that Trump is the result of. But just to say one of them, it's a colossal failure of the US education system. If you poll Americans and you ask them, how much does the US spend in foreign aid? They tell you 25%. That's way too much. How much should we spend in foreign aid? You ask them, and they say 10%. How much do we actually spend? 1%. This is one example of the colossal failure of education in the States. And it leads to a completely uneducated man leading the charge here. So I apologize to our Ukrainian friends and colleagues for this horrific action, and I'm deeply ashamed of where the US is right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jerry. Michael, do you want to say something?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you what did you mean when you said you shut the country down? What does that mean?
Well,
because it's
what it basically means is boycotts of various businesses. Already, people are boycotting Elon Musk's car business, Tesla. Yeah. It means work stoppages. It means a lot of things that communicate across the country that we're not going to stand for this anymore. And there's a significant amount of what's called buyer's remorse in the Republicans who voted for Trump. But really the question gets to be who at the top in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and actually the judiciary, will stand up to him, and what happens next. We don't know the answer to that yet.
Jerry, but what about what I'm missing too is hearing some of the more prominent Democrats stepping forward and
not a word from the Democrats.
Yeah. That's very surprising to me.
And very dismaying. The question of, I mean, the country is, at least a big part of the country is longing for leadership voices from the sensible part of the electorate, and no one's emerging yet.
Michael, do you want to say something? Or other American in the audience?
I do. Thank you, Jeanne and Françoise and Jerry. I feel actually very much the same and have since the election. I won't dive into those numbers again, but suffice it to say that there was no mandate here, and what's going on is, on the one hand, a kind of free fall that we don't even know what's truly happening because it's happening at night, literally, and in secret. A lot like I imagine February and March of 1933. I'm also deeply ashamed to even call myself an American right now. And even if that's irrational, I can't help it. It just is my experience. You know, I used to cope with things like this as far back as 2017 by telling myself and other people, I live on an island off the coast of America. I'm not really American, I'm a New Yorker. But this is something I think this country certainly hasn't seen in my lifetime, and maybe not in anyone's lifetime. Smarter people than I, like Tim Snyder, whose name I want to plug here, have compared this more to the Civil War or the near future to something that might resemble the America after the American Civil War, the extent of polarization. I think it's in process. I think the Democrats, I would like to think that they are playing a typical political, taking a typical political stance in the first month or months of a new presidency of being silent. But I think there's a cost to that silence. In New York, one still feels like one is close to the room where it happens, and privileging our gossip over the gossip in the provinces or in other states, which I think is a bit of false comfort. But our eyes are actually looking to Europe for help. Mine are focused on Berlin this weekend and the elections there to see what happens. And they're also focused on Vienna and the elections that took place in the fall to see what happens in terms of other countries mobilizing against the far-right political forces within their own borders. I think, and I want to echo what Françoise said, that Ukraine is not alone, Zelensky is not alone, and the people in this group who have such staggering courage to do the work that you're doing with the help of this group, perhaps, but who are on the front lines, you have my admiration and my commitment to do what I can do, which is admittedly small, but that's what Tim Snyder tells us to do. We need to do small things where we are, and over time, they add up. I love one of his lines from at an interview he did at the American Psychoanalytic a year ago, and then I'll stop, was to say that people are less likely to believe conspiracy theories the more that they know some things. The more people know some things, the less likely they are to believe conspiracy theories, even colossal ones that we're in the middle of. And I think that we can be the voice of some things with our patients, with our colleagues, with our politicians. And to plug his book,
Yeah,
see it, which 20 Tyranny, 20 Lessons in the 20th Century. He's updated that a couple of years ago. It has a new book on freedom, and I highly recommend them to everyone. For those who may not know, Tim Snyder is a leading scholar on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and also on totalitarianism in Europe and in the States.
Yeah, he comes quite often to Vienna.
Yeah,
He was just here last week and gave a fabulous.
I think he was in Ukraine last month also.
His book, I read a book from him, The Road to Servitude, is that the title?
The Road to Unfreedom in
Oh,
English.
on freedom.
Yeah.
That's it. Very good book.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I hope.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because we are starting to talk about various options. Of course, it's really hard to get our bearings right now, but we're thinking that maybe there's really little time left to the interim election, well, of Congress and Senate, and what can the U.S. get mobilized by then, by the time of election?
Yes,
Michael?
yes, actually, and Jerry, please feel free to weigh in here. The midterm election is in 2026, and at the moment in the Congress, the Republicans only have a margin of one
Vote, no?
vote.
Huh.
They actually have an advantage of 3, but 2 of the 3 seats are empty because Trump took people from the Congress to put in his cabinet. So the effective margin is only 1 vote. And this is really nothing, generally speaking. There are 435 or 6 total votes. So usually the party in power, now the Republicans, historically they lose seats in the midterm election. Biden won in 2020, and in 2022, the Democrats were predicted to lose seats, and they did, but only a small number. It was expected that they would lose a huge number, and they actually did better than expected. And I think this gave people's, some hope that any Democrat could win the presidential election in 2024. So I think Jerry brought up buyer's remorse. I think it's certainly a real fact that people are in shock. And I think it's safe to say that although the majority of voters did not vote for Trump, only 49% did. I think it's safe to say the majority of voters do not like what they see happening. They do not like the way it's happening. Even if he did the same things he's doing, if he did them openly and not secretly, he would probably be able to hold on to his support. And my hope and expectation is because of the methods he's using, he's much more likely to lose that support. And Jerry mentioned the boycott at the end of the month. I'm unaware of it, but that's okay. I think that as soon as that the Republicans in the Senate are kind of signaling that they have differences. As soon as but most politicians in our country, I think, are inclined to ignore until there's an economic impact.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's an economic impact, there was a boycott in New York the day of the Muslim ban, when that was announced a week into the presidency in 2017. Most of the cab drivers in New York are Muslim, and they stopped picking people up at the airport. And at LaGuardia, sorry if I'm going on, at LaGuardia and JFK, passengers were piling up because the Muslim cab drivers refused to pick anyone up. This is really how politics sometimes is affected in this country. People like to ignore things until it affects them personally and affects their pocketbooks. And when it does, they tend to act fast. But right now,
I heard the other day that there was a banner, a poster carried by some of the park rangers whom Trump had fired, saying that it's not the immigrants who kicked us out, it's the president who kicks us out, who kicked us out. So I think maybe movements like that, if they slowly accumulate from within the United States, you know, that could be a very, very helpful sign, hopefully.
There's
but before we go to the case, are there other voices? Alfred and Jerry, yes. And Oksana, if you wanted to say something too, it would be good.
Could I just say,
yes.
Thank you very much. This really is shocking. But I just wanted to point out that there's a parallel, in a sense, with this behavior, and that's in Gaza. So that the people who are affected by these things, the Palestinians or the Ukrainians, they are not asked about this at all. So the meetings are between Putin and between Trump and between the so-called leaders of the world, and yet the people that these things affect are ignored. So I'm thinking of trying to have an effect at a level that's small. Well, the small thing is all the people who are being ignored at the moment whilst these things take place. That's the only thing I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'm glad you make that comparison and you raise that point. Thank you, Alfred. Jerry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to maybe bring it back to the clinical for a second. I think it was Winnicott who ages ago, when talking about narcissism, said that the narcissist is caught up in a double dependence. That is, the narcissist is completely dependent on the other person going along with them, on flattering them, on whatever, and dependent on not knowing it. Because if you know you're dependent, your omnipotence gets threatened. And I think as people are saying, the system, the world, the system within the US, the economic system is utterly interdependent. If Trump puts a tariff on Canadian whatever auto parts, then Detroit shuts down, and then the people making other parts in Kentucky, they shut down. And in fact, the economic impact of most of what he's done so far is on red states. And when the fact of our interdependence leads business leaders to say to him, this can't go on, he'll have to listen to that.
It's also, sorry, Jeanne, it's also worth reminding ourselves and others that these are executive orders. He's actually bypassing the Congress. Because he knows he's quite vulnerable there. If he were to go to the Congress for a vote with a majority of one vote, there's no guarantee he would win that vote. He would win a vote at the Supreme Court, and he is likely to win votes in the US Senate, unfortunately. But these are executive orders, which does not mean that they are laws. They are his wishes, but not all been implemented. However, they are intimidating. They need to be tested at the Supreme Court, and many need to be passed into law. But they are still his wishes, his preferences, and part of his intimidation campaign. And indignation, as Françoise pointed out, and fear are the intended aim. And as Tim Snyder says, we need to stay calm and stay rational.
Thank you, Mike.
Oksana, you wanted to say something too. What? You asked Oksana about what?
No, we were asking if our colleague John Arden is here. Maybe he wanted to say something, but he doesn't seem to be here. I'm not sure what I could say the same thing. Yes.
Well, what you said to us before this, I think was very important.
Yeah, I was saying that we were livid because nobody badmouths our president. It's our prerogative to do it, so we're not allowing to do that to anyone. If especially taken into consideration that with his actions, he's expressing the will of Ukrainian people. Because if he didn't, he would be gone, because we're really fast with that. If our president does not fulfill the will of Ukrainian people, so the only way for Ukrainian president to stay in power is to fulfill the will of Ukrainian people for freedom. And so their problem is that they think that it's a personality problem. They think both now, Putin and Trump think that if they remove Zelensky, things will change, and they won't.
I think, Oksana, you have to now translate yourself, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Erikson.
We know that I think most Americans.
Michael, wait till she has done that.
It's okay, go on.
Okay. Is anybody else wants to say something from our Ukrainian friend?
Maybe just a couple words. Yesterday, we had this big group that meets weekly, a psychotherapy group, and there are therapists from various countries, and we speak weekly for 3 years. We've been meeting for 3 years, and we were asking each other, which stance do we take in this situation? And we formulated we were trying to find some soothing formulas, and we said that perhaps a really strange soothing formula could be that right now we can activate our resource to react to the unpredictable. We have to be ready for the unpredictable much more than before, and it's a complicated resource because it is related to anxiety and confusions, but we have to learn to use this resource and look for unexpected answers and solution, because the situation is unexpected itself. So we have to take an adequate stance towards this chaotic situation and find unexpected solutions, and that includes working with our patients.
Okay, well, that's a very good way to get back to our clinical work and get back to how we usually frame this work. And today I'm just going to give a very short summary of the case we heard last time. And then I have the pleasure to introduce Lyudmila. Forgive my non-existence of Ukrainian language, but if you could say your last name is Hebrin?
Rebin.
Rebin, okay, yeah. So last time we heard of a case that was not registered for clinical reasons. And hence, I do not want to reveal any of the clinical details we heard, but I can summarize it very briefly. So those who were there last time remember it, but maybe respect also the confidentiality of it. It was a very disturbing case that illustrated the failings, individual failings of a Ukrainian soldier who could no longer bear the horrors and terrors of the war and who went berserk, a term that Françoise has also used before, when he was sort of faced repeatedly with the atrocities of his enemies, the Russians. When we were talking about the category of those soldiers who go berserk in the war or after the war, it's because they can no longer remain decent in their role of a soldier. And hence they are compelled to go beyond the rules of the war, committing, as in this case, crimes of war, as this young soldier did. So without going into the details of this case, what was remarkable, I felt, about this young soldier was that he felt compelled to show his commander photographs of the crimes that he committed. However, the commander did not want to look at them and eventually ignored them. So in a way, he reminded me of one of Freud's relatively well-known paper from 1916 on called Some Character Types Met Within Psychoanalytic Work, in particular criminals from a sense of guilt. This soldier seemed to seek out punishment for the crimes committed, that he had committed, but never received an adequate response. So our discussion led us to the theme of how to stay human in the face of such barbaric violence, and how to find possibly some relief in the stories from antiquity, from the warriors of the past, and how to refine some sense of humanity in the literature of the past. Something that Françoise often mentions, something that Oleksandr Filts has taken a liking to, and as was also suggested last time when we heard about this case. The discussion about this young man also moved to the topic of the return of all these traumatized soldiers back in society when and if this ghastly war comes to an end. How is one to integrate the soldiers who have now fought for 3 years at the front and when they come back into civil society? We must learn from our past mistakes. For instance, the return of the American soldiers from Vietnam, who were largely left alone to their own devices after they returned from the war, when little psychological help was available to them. Françoise Davoine also referred to the necessity of various post-war rituals during which soldiers are asked to clean the bloodshed that they have committed before entering back into society. So no matter how this war will end, the task of treating soldiers returning from the front will be, I think, a major one, and it will preoccupy our group, I hope, for a long time. So with this, I want to introduce Ludmila. She is a certified psychologist, a psychotherapist, a psychoanalyst, and a senior researcher at the Institute of Psychology of the National Academy of Pedagogical Sciences. And she will present to us a case today of a young girl, and I will say no more, but please welcome Ludmila.
Hello, everyone. When I was picking the case to present today, I thought about a few clients, but I picked this one, and my decision was influenced not by my need for supervision, but also the circumstances of the today's world, as you will understand why. I'd like to present this young woman. She's 26. She's an internally displaced person who moved out of Crimea in 2014. Now she lives in the city of Ivano-Frankivsk. She is married but has no children yet. She has university education in economics. Her parents are still alive and they have a nice relationship. She is an only child. She also has grandparents.
Oksana,
Yeah,
can you go a little slower?
okay.
Because sometimes we get the reaction back that it goes too fast. So it would be good if maybe you could tell Ludmila to talk a little bit.
Yeah, I did.
Hard to follow.
Mhm. I don't know much about her childhood. At first, she said she remembered next to nothing about her childhood. Oh, it seemed fine. From the age of 1 to 2 years, she lived with her grandparents, maternal grandparents. She came to therapy in January of 2024, and she brought the following complaints. She wanted to find resource. Her emotions were blocked. And she was traumatized by her first breakup with her first boyfriend. And she'd like her symptoms of anxiety to go away. I'm actually quoting what she told me back then. She would like not to be fallen into this emotional pit all the time. The way she put it, I'm all braced in, I cannot relax. The last time I remember being relaxed was last spring, she said. Like her jaw is clenched and her shoulders and neck are braced. And the last straw to go to therapy was the fact that she started having migraines. And also she had some hormones imbalanced. She had some problems with her thyroid hormones. They were low. She said she couldn't stand the uncertainty, that the uncertainty is the worst thing for her. She also told me she was depressed at the age of 14. Then it happened again when she was 16. And starting with 16, from the age of 16, it lasted for a few years. And how it started. When she fell in love, she experienced a betrayal on the part of her partner. And then she had started having suicidal thoughts. She was contemplating committing suicide, but thanks to the fact that her relationship with her mother was really warm, the thought of her mother stopped her from doing it. In 2014, she was witnessing the annexation, the seizure, well, the occupation of Crimea. She actually went to the square where everything was happening, and she could see the military without badges enter the city. And a little bit later, I'll give you the description, the description she gave of these events. She also told me that in Ivano-Frankivsk, she fell in love for the second time. And she had this serious relationship, but her boyfriend's parents rejected her. So this eventually led to their breakup. And in this case, they stayed friends with this young man. In a few years, she found another boyfriend, and now she's married to him. She works a lot. Another symptom she brought was that when she was at work, she sometimes couldn't cope with situations of pressure because her supervisors are not very supportive of their employees and criticize them. So that's also really traumatic for her, to her. And so we've been working during this past year. And I use the method of symbol drama. I suggested exploring things that were happening to her, and I encouraged her to record her dreams, and perhaps we could process them as daydreams. And so there was this exercise we did. I'll just read it to you and show you her drawings. So she imagined this flower, a red tulip with pointed petals. And it was pleasant to touch, and it was warm, like these two petals. It was like home in Crimea. And there was this harsh desert all around, and the air was suffocating, and the earth was cracked. She wanted to dig this flower out with a spoon and plant it in a pot she had for quite a long time. And this soil in this pot was really nice, and she was not comfortable in that desert, so she wanted to go to her hiding place. And that hiding place turned out to be a garden which was completely shut out from the outside. There was a waterfall there. She felt like walking barefoot there. And there was also a passage into the woods. So she ended up in a pine forest with warm ground underneath. And she found a place where she felt like sitting down. And she relaxed. And the only thing that kept her tense were the distant snow-covered mountain peaks. I have to do something. I'm speaking in the first person now. The flower is opening up and I'm tense. I don't know what to do next. I would like someone to come out and give me some clues. There isn't enough sun. But if I go out, there's a desert there. And there is not enough sunlight in the shelter. I want the sun to come out, but it just won't. And I'm stupefied. The flower felt well in the desert, and I feel good in the shelter. I'll show you the drawings she made. This is this tulip in the desert. This is her planting it in the pot. And this is her hiding place where she was having some rest. Then we worked on some drama, and she brought some, every now and then she would bring a dream. And there was this dream she brought when she was standing next to a wide road, but she wanted to go into the field where there were a lot of sunflowers. But between the road and the field, there was this deep ditch and snakes might be there. And it was hard, it was scary for her to cross it, but she really wanted to. So she did go to look for a way to cross that ditch, and so she did cross that ditch and found an apple tree there with a nice, beautiful apples. At first she thought they were dirty, but then she took one of them and took a bite out of it, and it was really delicious, like tasting like honey. Then she had these feelings of tension again, as if someone was waiting for her. And indeed, there was a car parked on this road, and her father and her grandmother were in that car. And she didn't know what to do because they were waiting for her there, but she wanted to take a different road, a dirt road. So she thought about it for a while. Then she saw another apple tree, and she picks some apples from it and decides to walk on her own. So she went to her father's car, took her backpack from there, and went back to that dirt road. And there was a farmer driving on that road who took her into the town, where she found a place to stay for the night at some teacher who had students, and she asked him to take her as his apprentice as well. I'm not going to tell you all her dreams, but and after this dream, after choosing to follow her own road, her symptoms decreased significantly, and at work she started reacting differently to certain chance situations when people were yelling or demanding something she wasn't willing to do. So she got more resilient, and then she had another dream with the heart wrapped in thorns. She draws a lot, and I don't know, should I show you all the drawings or? I guess I will. This heart appears later on as well, by the end of our work. In our last session, she also worked on that image of a heart. And things were getting calmer in her life. She was more self-possessed. And then she started remembering the events of that happened back in Crimea. And once she remembered the situation when the Maidan revolution started in Kyiv. I'll now just read her text. This is what she wrote down. I was sitting alone in my dorm, watching the news about Maidan. I was very sad, scared, and lonely. It seemed that there was no one to support me in this pain. My body was hurting too, very much, as if I myself was Ukraine, and now I was being tortured and no one was there to help me, and I was left alone. I really wanted to go to Kyiv and become part of the resistance and to be involved in the process and help people fight for their country. I was not afraid that something might happen to me. My neighbors offered me to go with them, only they were going to Kyiv for money, to stand on the anti-Maidan. I wanted to use their transfer and to use the ride and just to get to Kyiv. I had no one to go to, but I was sure I would find my people there. My parents wouldn't let me go. They said I was their only child and it was dangerous. I did not appreciate their inertness. And also celebrations of holidays I did not understand. I was angry and I didn't want to talk to them. I ignored their friends who came to visit us. And I tried not to come home from the dorm. One morning, when I was in Simferopol, that's the capital of Crimea, military vehicles began to enter the city. The council was occupied and the green men appeared in the city. I felt that some changes were happening. I wasn't afraid, but I was feeling dazed. I walked downtown and saw the men with my own eyes. I was very well-mannered and politely asked them if they were not cold. And though they were presented as protection for us, deep down I understood that there were some shady people who came to take what's mine. We came to the council and there were many titushkas, and that's the term they use for the hired thugs, and very few of our people. And the Majlis, which is the assembly of the Crimean Tatars, was already gone. I met Sasha, a friend of mine, and he told us to run because it was no longer a peaceful rally. And that's what we did. And a few hours later, an assault began. And they started gassing our people. The rest of the story is really blurred. The referendum, the so-called referendum, the annexation, leaving Crimea, and the end of the school year. But well, that was her real memories. And then she told me she really held this grudge against her parents, that they hadn't let her go to Maidan. And she really would like to go to Maidan in her imagination. So the rest is her description, like in a parallel universe of her imaginary journey. So in a parallel universe, I did go to Maidan as an adult. I supported the younger me. I settled all the issues with my parents and with the university. And I went to the Maidan on my own as a young person. I met my people. I was helping in the kitchen and I was packing rations. I was safe and I felt that I was in the right place. Then I saw the horrors of the Maidan. I became scared and completely helpless as I witnessed the first deaths. I thought that I could do nothing and save everyone. But then I decided to find all the snipers and in my imagination to put them in vacuum bags. After that, there was a pause, a silence, uncertainty. I felt scared and alone again, but I saw our guys on the barricades. They were not giving up. They were building, pulling out the wounded. They were fighting. This built up anger, aggression, and strength in me. I gathered all my resources and turned into a panther, a fiery panther with no limits to its power. A giant slug was growing in front of me, moving without a goal, just crushing everything for the sake of destruction itself. I sank my claws and teeth into this slug like a panther, but I couldn't really hurt it. Then I started burning it with my fire, and it started to work. The men it was made up out of started to run away, and I was chasing them with my fire too. I burned them all, and no trace of them was left on our land, and there was a pause. This is the drawing where she is sitting reading the news in her dorm room, really frozen with fear. And this is her drawing of offering support to her younger self in her imagination. This is the Berkut soldier, like the shooter placed in a vacuum bag so he can't shoot anymore. This is the barricade, the tires, and she is like this fire starter panther. She turns into. This is her, the panther, who is trying to destroy the slug.
Okay.
So this was the world of imagination of this young woman. And also, I'd like to add that after this, in her real life, she started making her own decisions more confidently, and all kinds of decisions, bigger ones and smaller ones. For example, she couldn't bring herself to celebrate her birthday the way she wanted to, because she usually did it the way it was traditional to do. But she dared to celebrate her birthday with the people she wanted to invite. So she did it the way she wanted it, not the way she was expected to do. And not the way she was advised, maybe with the best intentions, but not the way she wanted it. Another problem that she has is her psychosomatic reaction. And this
Oksana, may I just ask you, how long is the case presentation? Still, because we don't have that much time later than for the discussion.
Just 3 minutes. Just
Okay,
3 more
good.
minutes.
Thank you.
Also, the work we did, we did some body work because she had some problems where she would, and she did this exercise when she was exploring her body on the symbolic level. And so she traveled to her heart, and I showed you her heart in thorns, and now she felt that her heart is healthy, but there's this big scar on it, on her heart. And on the one hand, she was glad that her heart was healthy, and on the other hand, it bothered her a little, the scar. So she tried touching it with her hands, and thought that perhaps this scar could go away since our body has the capacity to renew itself. And as soon as she thought this, the cells started proliferating and her heart became, well, got rid of the scar basically. Okay, the request for supervision, well, that was the last, that was what happened in the last session we had. During this year, I was thinking that my task was to explore what was happening and to help her find some resource in her life, not just find it, but find symbols and the resource in living them in the dreams when she was. We also worked on some everyday situations, her work situations that happened along the way. And now that she says that most of the time she is relaxed and calm, and she knows what she wants to do. And now she has new problems that she starts to have some problems with her husband because he got used to her doing what she had to, and now she often speaks up when she doesn't like something and does things her own way. And her husband would yell at her and get annoyed sometimes. He seems confused with her changes. And on one hand, she doesn't want to lose this feeling of herself and her boundaries. And on the other hand, she would like to keep her relationship, not to wreck it. And so the new task before us is, how do you build a new relationship with her husband when now that she is opening up in a whole new way to him? How do they keep their good relationship? And the last thing, when she first came to me, she told me she was afraid to get pregnant and she didn't want to have children. And now, without even me asking, she said that for some time she had been visiting the doctors and she is preparing to have a baby with her husband. And maybe you could help me understand the symbols better and the dynamics of the symbols she presented. And on the other hand, how do I help her in this new stage of therapy? Thank you.
Thank you, Ludmila. I imagine there's some questions about the case, because I think there's some information that is missing. I don't know whether Jerry or Françoise, you want to start?
Yes, a question at the beginning. I did not understand very well from where to where she was transported when she was younger. You said in the 2 first years she was with her grandparents, and after she went to Crimea, but in between I did not understand where was the journey.
The whole family lived in Crimea, but her maternal grandparents also lived in Crimea, but they lived in another house or flat. And her mother was studying, and for a year she just let her stay with her grandparents, but that was really close by, except that she needed more time to study, so she let her stay with her grandparents. And then they moved out of Crimea in 2014 after the occupation.
They moved out.
Mm-hmm.
And where did they go? After 2014.
They went to the city of Ivano-Frankivsk, that's in the west of Ukraine. She was the first to move. And for a few years, she was there alone without her parents. And only in a few years, her parents joined her.
Okay.
So she was there in Frankivsk all alone.
Okay. Until she was what age? All alone?
I guess that was from the time she was 16 till the time she turned 20.
Yeah, but when she went to Maidan, it was in 2014, and she went to Kiev?
She didn't go.
Oh,
she didn't go. She wished to go, but she didn't. Her parents didn't let her go.
I know. Oh, I thought she had gone. Okay, so she lived the front line of Maidan only by news or TV or how? Because when I heard, she was so close, like if she was fighting on the front. Without metaphor, she was in the situation.
She was in the Maidan that happened in her hometown in Simferopol in Crimea, because there were rallies there too, and her parents wouldn't let her go to Kyiv.
Yeah, but what she say, the dead she saw was in her hometown.
No, that was all in her imagination.
Okay. And another.
She ran away.
She ran away in her imagination. That's what you say.
On the news and in her imagination.
Yeah. So she went to war, so to speak, and it was transformed into symbol through the work with you. Just another question, because I didn't follow quite. The first images you show, the tulip and her sitting, and the image of the apple tree. Is it now or at the beginning when she was seeing you?
That was in the beginning of our therapy. That was last year.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
And the last pictures I showed you, those were the most recent ones, the ones in the last session. The one
with the heart. With the heart is now.
Oh, я не туди сказав. Okay, so the first time it was a year ago with the thorns, and when she was healing her heart, that was in the last session we had.
Okay. And just after Jerry, you will ask questions, but I have a stupid question. What does slug mean in French?
Snail, slug, escargot.
Escargot. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
A couple of questions. And first, a clarification, Ludmila. As I understood it, she actually was at the square in Crimea where the tanks and the green men came, and she did run away from that. Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that was the reality.
Yeah. And the two questions: why was she with her grandparents from ages 1 to 2? And secondly, what does it mean to that there were holidays she didn't understand?
What was your last question? Why was there?
She said that there were holidays that her
Oh,
parents had
holidays.
that
Okay,
she
that was
didn't
the word.
understand.
Mhm.
Well, she can't remember quite clearly, but about her staying with her grandparents, that was supposedly because her mother had to study, so she didn't have enough time to take care of her. So she placed her in her grandparents' care. And about holidays, those were the birthdays of their relatives, but it all happened in the time when the terrible news was coming from Kyiv and people were being killed, and she couldn't understand how people could celebrate birthdays if other people were getting killed.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
So may I, perhaps somebody wants to ask? Okay.
Go ahead, Françoise.
Okay. So the first images, how did you, because they were like symbols, you know, how she was far away to cross the desert of the catastrophe, the dry ground and the ditch with snakes, and it was dissociation. So thanks to you, she could cross those dangerous places where she had gone through. As you say, in reality, suddenly the danger of the disaster of the Crimea taken with a lot of threat to her life, but afterward, she crossed. I asked you, do you feel that she crossed, thanks to you, that ditch and that desert, and little by little could show her heart imprisoned with barbed wire? That's what I saw, barbed wire. And she was like Crimea itself. It was the heart of Crimea. That it was not a metaphor. Well, that was the metaphor. She was the country which she had to leave. What do you think about that?
I think that my role is more modest here because my role was to help her bring forward her own resources. She's really intelligent, but this series of traumatic events created this dissociation, and she was feeling really tense and unable to involve her own resources. So I helped her live. I helped her bring on her own resources and her own potential she had.
Yeah, I don't say that when you say modest, I understand that it's always a day to day, week to week difficult work. I don't say I don't praise a wonderful achievement, but still, she was able to find you as an other, and in a total state of loneliness. And that is, as you say, modest, because we grow very slowly as an other for somebody who has been, as you say very often, she felt all alone, all alone. But I was wondering what would you think of those beautiful fruits which were far away? Is that freedom? Is that is it the resources that you guessed she had from the beginning, and you helped to bloom even in the desert of loneliness? And the apple tree, to have beautiful apples, that are the resources that you helped her to grow. And she was at first distantiated for that. What do you think?
I think the important moment was when she wanted to replant this flower from the sand in the desert into the pot. How she was replanted herself from Crimea, which became a desert for her, into a different place.
Yeah, thank you. Jerry, you want perhaps to say?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. When our colleague Vamek Volkan, a very senior psychoanalyst, when he would stay at the Austen Rig Center, this hospital where I worked, and come to the case conferences, he would begin each discussion by asking the same question. And the question was, what are we treating? What are we treating? And people would sort of rebel against that. No, it's who are we treating? Well, it is, but he would try to get us to think about what's the problem.
Mm.
And I think what you're treating is resistance to the transmission of trauma. So what do I mean by that? I mean that she's made a journey from being a tulip to being a panther. And how did she get there? And what was the tulip all about? I mean, my wife used to be a librarian in a high school. And, she had lots of friends among the girls who were graduating, and they would all come to her whenever they had a breakup. And she would say to them the same thing. She would say, boys are like buses. Wait on the street corner and another one will come along. In other words, what's the trauma? Why is a breakup traumatic? Which is the story at the beginning. And I think the answer is that, at least one possible answer is that she was a bit of a hothouse tulip, meaning a tulip grown in a little garden shed with just the right amount of light and water, and a perfect tulip. But it couldn't really live in a desert, nor was there really enough sun, and she had to deal with that. And I think what's happening here is, I think when her parents said, no, you can't go to Maidan because you're our only child and it's dangerous, I think, in a way, I think they were saying to her, the trauma in our lives is something we couldn't bear to re-experience if something happened to you. So what happens next? She starts the work with you, and eventually she has a dream about a crossroads. She has to cross this road where there's a ditch and there are snakes. What would the Sigmund Freud Museum say about that? She finds an apple tree. What would the Bible say about that? And she takes a bite, and the paradise, the garden, transforms into the real world. And she comes back and she sees her father and her grandmother. And I would very much want to know what father's story is and what grandmother's story is. And she says to them, I'm not going to go your way. She takes the backpack and she leaves them. And then she becomes herself. And herself includes being a panther and wanting to fight. And she couldn't do that. She couldn't become a soldier until she had freed herself from the transmission of her family's trauma. And so that's the way I'm reading this. And of course, she tried the solution of marriage, boyfriend and then marriage, and maybe, we'll have a little protected environment that way. But actually, it's not what she wants. And now she has to renegotiate with her husband that she's actually a person who has her own opinions and can fight back. And do they really want to stay married now? And if they do, then they can have a kid. But otherwise, she's grown up. And I think she came to her therapy needing your help in doing that. And it seems to me that's what she's done.
I think you contained what was for me at least initially a confusing story, but I think you really put a wonderfully clear red line in there. So, but I'm wondering also what Ludmila thinks about the way you put the story together. It makes a lot of sense to me, which it didn't before. So thank you.
Uh-huh.
Ludmila, what do you think the way that Jerry framed the story of your patient?
Thank you, Jerry, because I think that it really became coherent that way. Thank you. And the symbols weren't transforming one into the other.
I must say,
sorry, go on, Jerry.
I was very taken with the drawing of the heart with the thorns.
Mm.
When we first saw the tulip, it looked childlike. And so I expected a childlike heart, but it's actually much like a real heart, and it's blue. And the thorns, even though one could interpret them many different ways, it strikes me that they're a kind of, the aggressive side of herself that's actually going to protect her heart by mobilizing her aggression when she needs it.
Well, Françoise saw them as barbed wire, right?
Yeah, and I can't help again by coincidence yesterday after phoning to you, Jeanne, I heard about a book called Letters from the East, written in French. It's just issued now by, I can't remember the name, Ukrainian writer living in Paris now, but she went a lot of time to Ukraine, and she talked with a lot of women, and it's a whole letter that she put together of the testimonies of Ukrainian women from different some on the front, some fighting at home, and for me it was amazing that this story you told was like a part of that book. I did not read it yet, but I want to do it. So the heart, to come to that with the barbed wire, she's talking about what's going on now. She was at first, as you say, far away. There was the desert, there was the ditch, there was the crossroad, and she decided to go her way. But her way is like every woman in Ukraine. Your heart is not, there is the war, the barbed wires are the war going on. Danger is still there, and the heart is still beating for freedom outside of the barbed wire.
Can I just add something I forgot about this transgenerational story? Recently she remembered that her great-grandparents were deported from the west of Ukraine to Crimea. So they actually went back to the land of their ancestors.
Oh, because excuse me, the place where she lives now is in the west, like where she was, where the great grandparents lived.
Yes.
Ah. And what was the reason for that deportation?
She doesn't know that. But that's what they did with the Ukrainians. They deported them from one region to the other.
But who is they, Ludmilla? Who did the deporting?
Sovietic?
The
Soviet Union communists, all the same people. it's always the same people.
Yeah. That's very important, because she inherits also. She lived through the Panzer is also triggered by what happened to her great grandparents. It's a beautiful, beautiful drawing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Michael, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Jeanne. It was, in a way, such a vivid visual and through the dreams, also visual presentation. And I wanted to share a couple of associations that I had, because I think they're relevant to me, and I believe they may be relevant to this. So I may not be able to put it together and I know I can't, as beautifully as Jerry did. But I want to elaborate, or ask you to elaborate on the theme of transgenerational trauma. Here are my associations, though. The tulip that's with a thorn that's in, and please correct me if I misunderstood anything, but the tulip that has a thorn and is encased in something, it's not part of the real world yet, like your patient, as I understood, whose parents acted as a kind of protective case. And I want to cue Jeanne here, because I hope to hand off to you, because it reminded me of The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince, where there's a rose that has a thorn to protect itself and is encased in glass.
Mm.
And the prince is the prince, and this is not a story for children, it's just a story about children for adults. But the prince believes that, he rules over this planet, and among his possessions is a rose. The rose that's encased, however, with this thorn, is terribly vain, something he's too immature to understand. The problem is that the rose is all he has, the only relationship he has with another object with which to learn about relationships and about life, about closeness, about love, and about loss. And I refer you to the book to read that. Chapter 21, I think, is the key. But this resonated for me very powerfully. And the thorn is the key symbol, the signifier. to probe a little bit about transgenerational trauma, you mentioned now this forced migration of the parents from what would have been, I think, Galicia a century ago, Ivano-Frankivsk, this is west of Lviv, I think, right? To the east, whether it was by the Soviets or whether it was by the Polish Republic between the wars, it was forced by someone else. I understand that to be the point. I'm wondering if you know more about the parents' trauma, whether it dates from that time, whether there was another child, whether your patient had a sibling who may have died before your patient was born or after, because there's a dynamic that is also resonating with me, that your patient may be a replacement child, a replacement for another child whose death preceded her birth or who died after she was born. And the parents' inability to mourn that loss was in a complex sequence of reactions that say the compromise formation is to turn the surviving child into the dead sibling, a replacement of the dead sibling. Sometimes it can be quite concrete in terms of name, but often it's not. Nevertheless, it's a transformation that occurs not only by projection of the parent subjectivity, but by an identification in the patient, the dead sibling or dead relative. It could be in another generation. That came to mind for me because children who function as replacements often have difficulty with separation in adolescence. And again, I may have misunderstood something, but I did understand that this was and is perhaps an ongoing or reactivated conflict for her around which you and others were speaking about. I'll stop there. Love, loss, and replacement.
Do you know anything about that, Ludmila? Do you know anything about that history? Whether there's a possibility that she is a replacement child?
Not quite. In her first interview, she could not remember all these things, but in our last session, she mentioned that her grandmother had lost several children, and her parents really wanted to have a second child, but they also lost her child when she was 6. So you felt it really correctly, Michael.
Oh my God. And quoting Le Petit Prince, the Little Prince, you know that the story was triggered from Saint-Exupéry because he had lost a brother. And the Little Prince, he was very close to a brother when he was adolescent.
I didn't know.
And his brother died in a very, very agony, you know, a painful agony. And he was, so when he's a plane aviator, Airman, he crashed in the desert. And then he thought he would die himself. And then comes his brother from the planet with his rose, with the thorns. And so you guessed something very, very intuitively to the story of this patient, well, this young woman, because of course she also is linked to
No.
Was it previously sibling who died before her?
No, after.
After her?
After she was born.
Yeah. Yeah, but that was the story of Saint-Exupéry. It was an elder brother, I think.
Thank you.
Or no, a younger, but they were close, very close. And this story is so powerful because it's the story of child, well, adolescent in the desert. You're right to quote that book that everybody knows now around the world. And he was an airman during the war. He was, Saint-Exupéry died. He was crashed in the sea during the war with his plane, which was found recently, the plane.
He lived in New York for a while too.
Yes, beforehand. Yeah.
There's another story that I've been thinking about as I listen to the patient story, and it's has to do with a college student in the U.S. named Claire Bernstein, who was also a folk singer and songwriter. And she grew up in a house with her parents and her grandmother, who was Jewish and escaped Germany in a very close call, and she lost many relatives in the course of this. And of course, the grandmother would never talk about what happened in her generation. And Claire's mother kept saying to her, "You can't say anything to grandma about this because she just can't bear it." And so, but Claire grew up feeling the generational trauma and how it was being lived out in the family. And so when she got into college, after a couple of years, she decided she needed to learn about this. And she went to her grandmother and said, "Grandma, this summer I've got an internship, a job in Leipzig, and I'm going to learn about that place and what happened." And the grandmother said to her, "You're crazy. I forbid it. I forbid it. You may not do this." But Claire was strong-minded, and she thought about it, and she went back to her grandmother, and she said, "Grandma, I'm going." And her grandmother said to her, "And why haven't you invited me?" And Claire was astonished and said, I never dreamed that you would even consider it." And the grandmother said, "I will for you." And so it was a marvelous story about a kind of transgenerational trauma, silence, and the decision of the next generation to, I need to know something here, and to embark on that, even though it's risky for the previous generations. And that's what I'm hearing in this story. She needs to know things. Before, she didn't know anything, but now she needs to know, and thoughts are coming to her about what happened, and maybe she'll learn more. But this is all a part of liberation, and it's really quite. There's a kind of beautiful irony that, in a sense, in the risk this patient took, she then rescues her parents. She gets her parents out of Crimea to Kiev. So it's actually a wonderful story of, I think, family healing.
The curiosity of the child enables the parent or grandparent to overcome their resistance to memory.
Yeah,
they do it for altruistic reasons. They can do it
for the child, and the bite is taken from the tree of knowledge.
From the apple tree.
And knowledge had been forbidden to her, but now she says, "I need to know."
But don't you think that that's also repeating itself a little bit, coming back one more time to the case before we have to end, in the transference, counter-transference? In the sense of, I thought it was very interesting, Ludmilla, when you said to Françoise that you were more modest in your work, as if you didn't dare to ask the patient more. You said yourself, you didn't know that much about the history of her. And it sounds like what's happening is that over the period of time that you've seen her, this young woman has grown less and less modest. She's now a panther, beautifully painted, and maybe can also muster up much more courage to ask and to inquire about all the history she doesn't know yet, and maybe you can do as well, not maybe feel so fearful to find out things from her.
Maybe there's a resonance with the session, Jeanne, and what you provided for us today, the space to share, for each of us to share our pain and shame and fear, and we come out a little stronger.
I want to add something. Thank you, Mike. I want to add something. You hear in France everywhere, oh, how can you put a child to the world in those so terrible situations? And I say, I was born in 43, the worst year of the war, and I'm very glad to be there, even if now I'm very old. So that is, you were asking for metaphor, but there is more beautiful outcome than even metaphor, is that she is going to have a baby, in spite of all those barbed wires. The heart is pulsing, not shriveled like the desert. It's not it has not been dried like in the desert, and it will taste honey like the apple. Because so your role was perhaps modest, like our role is always modest, because we try, we make it's long, but yet there is a beautiful outcome. She becomes she will give birth. It's not a well, it could be a great metaphor.
Françoise, I'm not sure, is she already pregnant, or is she
wants
to, and she wants to, right?
She did not want at all. And
but
now,
it's so interesting to me that she kept the search to become pregnant a secret from Ludmilla as well.
Yeah.
You know, it only revealed it now that there could be something growing inside of her.
But I can't help again that this story resonates with Ukrainian women, those who, all who are each in their own way facing those barbed wires, and the heart is still alive, and they are warriors on their own, each on their own battlefield, not always in the front. And she is with you, with your modest help, she could make a big step across the ditch, across the desert. So it grows. Life grows. They grow.
We have room maybe for one more question or comment, and then we have to come to an end. Is Bernd? You have to unmute yourself.
Lautsprecher.
About
I don't get the question.
Could you read the chat, Bernd? I couldn't
What
read
is
it.
Sure, it's a question. It's a question. Yeah, if it's a question whether the trauma of Crimea annexation and war, has it transformed into a transgenerational trauma? has it become transgenerational?
Well, could the one who asked this question say more about it? I'm not sure I completely understand it. Do we have the person here? Or?
Sure, I can explain it. I wrote that. I had
Great.
this question. Perhaps I didn't quite understand this, our supervisors, but when you talked about the war trauma has transformed it into transgenerational trauma in the analytic space. Can I answer to this?
I'm not totally sure I'm getting it myself, but what we've been talking about is traumatic experience in the patient's parents' family, and their her grandparents from a previous displacement, and whatever losses may have gone along with that, and maybe the loss of a sibling in her own life. But that's, in a way, that doesn't become transgenerational except in terms of what it means to her parents and so on. That's the transgenerational part we've been focusing on. You know, how to think about that moving into the future is another question, but a very important one too.
Would you agree, Jerry, that it's not just a transmission of losses, but I think in this case also the transmission of silences?
Yes, yes.
Because there's been so much that has not been talked about in this case.
Right.
And that's beginning to open up in the therapy.
That's right. A whole history and knowledge that the family has been living out by trying to create a little Garden of Eden where nothing has to be spoken. And this person needs to liberate herself from that, to be a grown up, to move from being a little girl to being a potential warrior.
But also, Jerry, they are in the silence trauma. There are a lot of resources that Ludmila makes bloom again. But they are silent resources. How those great-grandparents resisted to their deportation, how do they survive?
Yeah.
And although the things are not said, there is a transmission of resilience is the word today, but it's not only that, it's vigilance, observation, energy. That thanks to Ludmila, she could use and not be conscious of.
Yeah. And very importantly, use images in drawings and dreams before words.
Michael, one very short last comment, then we do have, because it's 9 o'clock here. So.
I completely agree with what's just been said. I think that the question of what is transmitted is, of course, the $10 million question. Sometimes it's affect, sometimes it's memory, sometimes it's even behavior. But I fully agree that in this case, it's a gap, and the gap is silence. And I think that to the extent that Ludmila is also roused from a kind of encased modesty or slumber, even, it could be any word, I imagine that the patient might be ready for Ludmila to join her in the asking of the question. Mm. I'm conflating Jerry's story with this case because it was so moving about the daughter who, and I lived this personally myself years ago, which is another conversation, but that adolescent told her parents and her grandma, "I'm going." Mm. she didn't ask her to our surprise, the grandmother said, well, aren't you going to take me? And I think in this case, it could be the patient is ready for the analyst to offer to accompany her on her internal and external journeys.
Mm-hmm. We do have to stop. It's 9 o'clock, a little bit after 9. We scheduled our next meeting for the, I wrote it down, for the 27th. What is it? Hold on.
We will send out the next meeting. We haven't
It's
scheduled yet.
No.
I think we haven't scheduled properly yet. I think we should send out the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, because one of us cannot do it. Well, so in which case it's either going to be the 13th, I think, or the 27th, right? Is that right, Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah, or perhaps we go into April 4th. So let's check later.
Okay, so we'll send out a date the moment we know it. I'm sorry that we couldn't be more certain about it until now. But anyway, many thanks to you, Ludmilla, for presenting this case. Yeah. Thank you, Françoise and Jerry and Michael and everybody who participated, and Oksana, thank you so much. And we'll see each other either at the end of next month or at the very beginning of April. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.